Now, it seems to me what's happening now is that what Eliade called the human desire for self-transcendence expressed through the motif of magical flight has been taken up by the technological society as the idea of space flight. Space flight is nothing less than the exterior metaphor for the shamanic voyage. In other words, in our terms, for the hallucinogenic drug experience. This is the way that engineers get high. They go to the moon. I was originally going to call this talk Monkeys Discover Hyperspace, but I decided that was a little outrageous, and I settled on hallucinogens before and after psychology. So before I dig into that subject, I'll say a bit about how I come to have an interest in these substances and their very peculiar effects. Years and years ago, after an LSD trip, I imagined that I perceived a relationship between the LSD experience and the motifs of Tibetan religious art. And accordingly, I went to Nepal and took up residence in a village of Tibetan refugees. And I quickly learned that the shamanism that I wanted to study was inaccessible for reasons of language, for reasons such as that the Buddhists who were teaching me Tibetan looked askance at the shaman that I wanted to associate with. And I realized then that the association between shamanism and hallucinogens is such that both, in a way, are taboo. And when you deal with pre-literate cultures, you discover that the shaman is a very peculiar figure. He is critical to the functioning of the psychological and social life of his community, but in a way he's always peripheral to it. He lives at the edge of the village. He is only called upon in matters of great social crisis. He is feared and respected. And this might be a description of these hallucinogenic substances. They are feared and respected. They are misunderstood. They are only called upon often in moments of great crisis, and they are a persistent but always peripheral part of the community. And I saw this in Nepal among Punpo Tibetan shamanism, which is a non-hallucinogen-based shamanism. I saw it in Indonesia, where techniques had been developed to induce trance that were non-chemical techniques, specifically dance in the case of Bali and Lombok. And I saw it finally in the Amazon, where I think I contacted the primal shamanism. As you know, there's a division of opinion on the matter of whether narcotic, or as I call it, hallucinogenic shamanism is decadent or in fact primary. And Eliade took the position that hallucinogenic shamanism was decadent, and Gordon Wasson, very rightly, I believe, contravened this view and held that actually it was very probably the presence of the hallucinogenic drug experience in the life of early man that lay the very basis for the idea of the spirit. Well, as I made my way through these various cultures and various hallucinogenic substances, it came to my attention that, in my opinion, and I believe in the opinion of Gordon Wasson and other scholars, Henry Munn comes to mind. He wrote a marvelous essay called The Mushrooms of Language, that in the minds of those who associated themselves with the mushroom, there were certain assumptions about psilocybin that were different from the mythos that was arising around some of the other hallucinogens. Psilocybin, I think, of the more commonly available hallucinogens, is the most visual, and it is certainly visual if it is done in the traditional manner. And I'm always amazed at how little understood or practiced the traditional manner is, so I'll sketch it for you. The traditional manner of taking psilocybin is to take a very healthy, effective dose in the vicinity of 15 milligrams on an empty stomach in total darkness. You've been there. And in that situation, which is in a sense a situation of sensory deprivation, the psilocybin is able to exfoliate itself to the fullest degree and to show you what it is, not against a background of the reality that ordinarily surrounds us, but against a background of darkness, so that the pure essence of the thing can be shown. And it is extraordinarily bizarre, extraordinarily difficult, I believe, to assimilate into your worldview. And this is whether you're a Bora youth undergoing initiation or whether you're a college student or a research chemist. These things do not lend themselves well to integration into language. If they did, they wouldn't occupy this peripheral position after 10,000 years of human culture. But above and beyond the visual intensity of psilocybin, the thing that sets it apart, I believe, is a phenomenon that might be described as an induction of audio hallucination. But in fact, to describe it that way is to fall back on a kind of medical jargon reductionism, because what it really is a voice in the head that is separate from the perceived ego function. In other words, a voice speaks. You hear it, and it seems to be operating independent of the ego. It operates in a psychopompic role as a teacher, as the narrator of the vision which is revealed, much in the same way that Virgil led Dante through the circles of hell. And the modern intellectual equipage is not capable of assimilating this. This is the sort of thing that we associate with psychopathology. We can hardly imagine anything more alien to modern consciousness than a disembodied voice in the head. However, if you familiarize yourself with Western thought on a scale of millennia, you discover that not only is this not an alien phenomena, but for much of human history it has been inimical to the human experience. And it is called, relying on the Greeks, the logos. The logos is a voice heard in the head, and the logos was the hand on the rudder of human civilization for centuries, up until, in fact, the collapse of the ancient mystery religions and the ascendancy of Christianity to the status of a world religion. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the story in Plutarch of the fisherman who heard a great noise and saw something fall into the sea and heard a voice from the sky saying that great Pan was dead, that, in other words, the ancient gods had been eclipsed. And, in fact, in Jungian terms, the ancient god, by falling into the sea, had been submerged in the chthonic unconscious and disappeared from the experience of ordinary people. From that period on, it was 15 to 17 centuries while Christianity worked out the implications of its message, while science spun away from Christianity and created its own set of modes. The New World was discovered, reason was enthroned, scientific method was enthroned, and the civilization that we know arose around us. But then, in 1953, Valentina and Gordon Wasson went to Huatla de Jimenez in the Sierra Mazatec of Oaxaca, and they discovered this mushroom cult. And it's my belief that to this day we do not know what exactly it was that they stumbled upon. Mushroom, drug, cult, all of these ideas about what it was rests on the assumption that we know what we're talking about when we talk about mind. And in fact, everything that has been said at this conference has rested on the assumption that we know what we're talking about when we invoke a concept like mind. But the truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, that after 2,000 years of grappling with the problem, scientists cannot even tell you how you can form the conception that you will change your open hand into a closed fist, and it will happen. This is an intervention of mind into the world of matter that no philosopher has been able to give a satisfactory account of. Now, with the hallucinogens, this intervention of one realm into another, of mind into matter or matter into mind, is raised to a pitch of excruciating intensity. And it's my belief that one of the unconscious reasons which underlies the odd attitude of the establishment toward hallucinogens is the fact that they bring the mystery to the surface as an individual experience. In other words, you do not understand the psychedelic experience by getting a report from Time magazine or even The Economist. You only understand the psychedelic experience by having it, and therefore, to understand it is to embark on a course of action of self-education outside the context of your culture, because your culture has no answers about what this thing might be. Okay, so much for that. But psilocybin and DMT to a lesser extent, although it is so brief and so intense that it's sometimes hard to sort these things out, invokes a logos or reintroduces the phenomenon of the logos into the experience of modern people. So what can we make of this? I think we have to take it very seriously. I think that the culture crisis that we are involved in has to do, and by that I mean the entire global cultural crisis leading possibly to the extinction of the species, has to do with the fact that our models developed over the last 500 to 1,000 years have played us false. They aren't working. And the cultures that we have conquered with capitalism and technology, we have repressed their connection into these intuitive realms. We have established one method for the arbitration of truth, and everything which does not pass through that narrow gate is relegated to the realm of mythology or worse, cultural immaturity. And yet we are the culture that is in crisis. When you go to the rainforest, you don't find cultures in crisis except to the degree that they are being impacted by us. So I believe that it is no coincidence that in this moment of maximum cultural crisis, which we call the 20th century, the hallucinogens, the entheogens, have emerged in Western culture. It is no accident that Wasson made his trip to central Mexico and contacted the mushrooms. What he discovered in the mountains of Mexico was nothing less than Eros, sleeping but alive, the body of Osiris preserved over an entire astrological age, metaphorically speaking. In other words, that to take the mushroom was to transcend the cultural momentum of the past couple of millennia and return to a world where the logos was a realized phenomena. And we heard from Carl Ruck last night about the Eleusinian mysteries. This was not a minor phenomenon. Over a period of 2,000 years, everyone who was anyone made the pilgrimage to Eleusis and had the experience. And it put the stamp on Greek drama, Greek philosophy, later Roman politics. All of these things were influenced by the hallucinogenic experience. So our culture, spiritually, has played the role of the prodigal son. We, for reasons of ideology, botanical geography, other factors, have not had visionary ecstatic hallucinogens installed in our culture as we perhaps should have over the last several hundred years. Now that is changing. And in order to understand what the change means, you have to look further back in time, in fact past history, to prehistory, again to the model of the shaman, not the shaman as anthropologists describe him, but the shaman as shaman dream him, because every shaman looks back toward an archetypal first shaman who was superhuman, who did go to the stars, who could go to the bottom of the ocean, who could move through the gates of death and return with a lost soul. Now, it seems to me, when you pull back to the perspective of several thousand years, all of history can be seen as an adumbration on this wish, expectation, hope for a superhuman condition, for a transcending of the laws of gravity, of the laws of life and death, into a superhuman condition that was salutary for mankind as a whole. In other words, the shaman as the archetypal perfected man. Now, this afternoon you heard Metzner refer to alchemy as one of the refractions of this concern with the perfection of the spirit. It is about the projecting of a perfect substance, which is the self, purified. But it also led to the rise of modern science, basically through a misunderstanding. Now, it seems to me what's happening now is that what Mircea called the human desire for self-transcendence expressed through the motif of magical flight has been taken up by the technological society as the idea of space flight. And I'm sure if Tim Leary were here, he could speak to this more eloquently than I can. Space flight is nothing less than the exterior metaphor for the shamanic voyage. In other words, in our terms, for the hallucinogenic drug experience. This is the way that engineers get high. They go to the moon. What we need to do to transcend our cultural schizophrenia and to heal the rift between spirit and soul, or world and self, is to realize something which we all pay lip service to, at least I'm sure all the people in this room pay lip service to, which is the idea that the inside and the outside are really the same thing. But I don't think the cultural implications of that have been clearly drawn. What it means really is that all our dreams of transformation have to be realized at the same time, and that we cannot go to space with our feet in the mud, nor can we in fact turn ourselves into an eco-sensitive, hallucinogenic-based culture on Earth unless we fuse these dichotomous opposites. It is only in a coincidentia positorum, a union of opposites that does not strive for closure, that we are going to find cultural sanity. And this is the thing that the entheogens, the hallucinogens, deliver with such clarity and regularity. They raise paradox to a level of intensity that no one can evade. And in doing that, they set the stage for turning yourself into the kind of person who does not insist on having it either or, black or white. And a culture composed of those kinds of people will be a culture more civilized than any that we have seen so far. If I can paraphrase Teilhard de Chardin for a moment, he said, or I will paraphrase him this way, when the human race understands the potential of the hallucinogenic drug experience, it will have discovered fire for the second time. And this is what we're waiting for. We are waiting for the discovery of fire so that we can transcend the monkey business and get on with the great business of inhabiting our own imaginations. And it's impossible to take that position without someone saying, Manichaean, dualist, enemy of the body. Perhaps, but since the very beginning of culture, what we seem to be are animals which take in raw material and excrete it imprinted with ideas. And we do this on a larger and larger scale, looking toward the day when all physical constraints can be lifted off of us, as they are in our imaginations, and we can erect the kind of civilization that we want to erect. And this vision was anticipated by no less a seer than James Joyce, who said, if you want to be phoenixed, come and be parked. Up in the Yent Prospector, here in Moycain, we flop on the Simi side. Moycain is the red light district of Dublin. But up in the Yent Prospector, you sprout all your worth and woof your wings. This was part of his program. He hoped that man would become dirigible, as he put it. And he didn't live to see the revolution of the hallucinogens, but I think had he would have felt that man was well on his way to becoming dirigible. And it seems to me that we stand at an enormous threshold. The future of the human mind must loom large in the future of the human species. If it doesn't loom large in the future of the human species, then we are in very big trouble. Now, a term that has been applied, or was early on applied, though I haven't heard it used at this conference, to hallucinogens was a consciousness-expanding drug. And this may not be automatopoeic, but it's certainly phenomenologically accurate and neutral. They are consciousness-expanding drugs. And the question, what is consciousness, cannot be divided away from the question, is man good? And this is a question that we have to answer for ourselves, because I believe that we are not going to extinguish ourselves, that we are going to evade the many obstacles that are so obviously ahead of us in the next few years. We are going to reach the threshold of the galaxy, but in what form? And in order for the form in which we reach the edge of the galaxy and present ourselves to the hegemony of organized intelligence that must exist there, in order for that form to be worthy, we are going to have to go with our minds fully illuminated in front of us. And that means that we can have no more truck with the idea of an unconscious, of an inaccessible and dark part of the human psyche that cannot be controlled. That is obviously a description of the childhood of an intelligent species. And I believe that these hallucinogens signal the end of that childhood. There have always been individual shamans who have made that transition. And in that sense, the taking of hallucinogens is an ahistorical phenomenon. It has always been going on. But the idea of psychedelic societies is something new. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone takes the drug. It merely means that the complexity and the mysteriousness of mind are centered in the consciousness of the civilization as the mystery which it comes from and which it must relate to in order to be relevant. So I'll take a couple of questions.
you were correctly referring to a city in California, and I said, what do you think of Tulum? That was a coincidence. How do you explain that?
Well, you know, a coincidence is what you have left over when you apply a bad theory. Any other questions?
Do you have any recommendations about how we might maintain a sense of integrity about that idea?
About this idea that the mind is the central, Well, I guess the question is, if there any advice vis-a-vis utilization of materials that would allow you to hang on to whatever perceptions I may have triggered in you. I wouldn't presume to answer that question, but I'll answer another one that might relate to it, which is I think that when you take hallucinogens, you should take an effective dose, and I can't stress enough the importance of lying down and being still in darkness on an empty stomach. I mean, if you want an oral empowerment, that's it. Nothing could be simpler. And yet you would be amazed at the number of people who, when you mention psilocybin, the first question that occurs to them is, will I be able to drive? This is... One more. Yeah.
Which way would you categorize NDA?
With regard to what? Well, NDA, the word empathenogen or empathogen seems to me very appropriate. It is not a powerful visual hallucinogen. I'm very interested in the visual hallucinogens because it seems to me they pose certain fundamental questions about information theory and that kind of thing. For instance, you know, where do these hallucinations come from? These extremely intricate, far more intricate than any visual scene that your eye falls upon in ordinary reality. These intricate, ever-shifting information patterns. I don't believe that they can be reduced to spirals, lines, and dots. What I see isn't like that. It's more as though you had a holographic hyperspatial radio and you just tune down the dial, and here's a desert world in a triple star system, and here is a city somewhere inhabited by insectile creatures with a machine symbiosis. Here is something else, and it's just flipping by. I would prefer to believe that the human imagination is the holographic organ of the human body, and that we don't imagine anything. We simply see things so far away that there is no possibility of validating or invalidating their existence. One more.
I was interested in the psychotherapeutic potential for dimethyltryptamine being a short-acting tryptamine. Is there enough time within that peak experience to benefit from any death rebirth experience, or is it, in your opinion, too short-acting drugs have any profound, lasting effect?
No, I think it certainly has a profound and lasting effect. The very brevity of it serves to convince you that it isn't a drug at all, but that it's carried you into another dimension and back again. And that alone is something to ponder. Well, I thank you for your attention. Get my notes off of here. Surely not controversial. Hate to have a conference haunted by controversy. Well, it's wonderful to be here. Kenny has been plotting and scheming with me to get me to a Seeds of Change conference, and I think we missed the last two with schedule conflicts. And finally, there was one in my backyard, so here I am. I thought what I'd talk about today
it's always tricky to talk about the environment because it is our mother, it is the matrix that sustains us, and yet all discussions gravitate toward the crisis that haunts it, generated by us, and now, hopefully, managed by us in a way that biological diversity and human diversity can somehow make a peace with each other, so that the glories of these domains of nature, and they are both domains of nature, are not compromised, one for the other. And it always, there's no dearth of current news on the front where this battle is being fought. Day before yesterday, I'm sure some of you saw it in the newspaper, the recent measurements on the ozone hole over the Antarctic show that it is depleted beyond the theoretical limit. In other words, where it is depleted more thoroughly than theory predicted in its most extreme modeling of that process. This is only one of a number of areas where the planet is being challenged in different ways. I was in England this summer, and the newspapers were full of stories about fissionable material and plutonium triggers for tactical nuclear weapons being peddled in the red light district of Frankfurt. This is another area where the health of the earth, the health of our children, is held in bondage by the least noble among us, to put it mildly. So, in a sense, we're in a dark age. Ozone values are not expected to turn up before the turn of the century, no matter what policies are put in place down here. Starvation, displacement of populations, collapse of central authority, all of these things, terrible in themselves, extract a terrible toll on the environment. And that is rarely factored into these things. The world is growing ever more complex. Every day, every minute, every hour. The number of inventions, the number of connections among people, the number of people, all these things are increasing, compounding our creative potential, compounding our problems in a mad race between what seem to be incredibly positive forces and incredibly negative forces. And in this kind of situation, of course, each moral person is challenged by the old Tolstoyan question, what is to be done? We each have very limited resources, limited strength, limited funds. Where shall we put our shoulder to the wheel to do the most good? This is a very complicated question. If we save the rainforests but ignore the threat from planetesimal impacts, we may turn out to have entirely wasted our resources and betrayed our trust to the rest of life on the planet. So it's not simply about doing good, it's about being effective. And I wanted this morning to just list, it's a laundry list, areas that require attention, and then to discuss sort of the overarching metaphor that might make it easier to deal with what otherwise is an incredibly daunting challenge that we face, simply to save the land you're standing on, the air you're breathing, the water you're drinking. In a sense, this issue was postponed for 40 or 50 years while the male dominators played the capitalism-communism shuffle, and the rest of us were the marks conned by that particular bit of historical chicanery. Now the veil has been rent. Marxism's status as a paper tiger has been exposed, and what we hear of now are trade agreements, free trade. Don't let anybody kid you. Free trade is a license to peddle crap everywhere. That's what free trade is about. Trade in physical items manufactured out of the body of the earth should be made as difficult and expensive as possible. The piling up of material goods, what I call consumer object fetishism, is the force that is destroying this planet, not only where it is actively practiced, here, for example, but throughout the world where people yearn to practice it, because the images being beamed down to them from MTV tell them that without a 3-car garage, without a sunken bathtub, without a sailboat, you are nothing. And the fact of the matter is, there isn't enough glass, metal, and plastic in the near surface of this planet to deliver a middle-class lifestyle to all the people who have now been sold on that particular style. So I really believe that we were misled, blinded, bamboozled by this great historical struggle between communism and capitalism, because both distorted the environment, toxified vast amounts of land, and squandered the treasure of their peoples in unconscionable ways. Well, now, where do we go from there? I think we have to draw back away from our various botanical gardens, seed preservation programs, programs that feed the hungry, the little things that we each commit ourselves to, and try and get an overarching understanding of the process in which we're embedded. And I believe that when you do that, the two great polarities that emerge in the human world are materialism versus eco-consciousness. When I first began formulating what I would say here, I didn't say materialism. I said capitalism. But I really believe that capitalism can be saved, or at least partially reconstructed to serve human needs. Materialism cannot. It cannot, because there is not enough matter around for us to fabricate it into our toys without drowning ourselves in the toxic byproducts of that historical effort. Materialism versus eco-consciousness. It's not a very fair match. They have all the money, all the guns, all the propaganda. What we have on our side is that if they win, everybody dies. How long will the battle go on before this perception makes its way into the headquarters of the other side? I myself don't know. Here, I'd like to go over a list of areas that require attention. Some of this will be no news to you, some of it perhaps. Toxic disposal. We don't have a theory of toxic disposal. What we have is a theory of toxic hiding, shell games, postponement, tabling. We need a real method of toxic disposal. Until it comes, we continue to sequester radioactive and toxic materials throughout the world in the body of the earth. Many of these toxic materials have half-lives of hundreds of thousands of years. Again, yesterday's newspaper. Greenpeace reported encountering a Soviet frigate in the Sea of Japan, dumping nuclear cores and nuclear coolant into the Sea of Japan, where the Japanese population draws 30% of its sea catch. We need toxic disposal. Plants have a role to play here. Many of you know that the solanaceous plants, like the jimsonweed and the datura, sequester heavy metals, but this information has not been made the centerpiece of a crash program to clean up the land, simply because people do not care enough, or rather human institutions, read corporations, do not care enough. Environmental restoration, another area where tiny pilot projects are held up in such a fashion to give people permission to think, well, that's under control. At least, we don't have to worry about that. Most of the restoration programs that you hear about are in fact cosmetic efforts designed to divert your attention from some greater horror being perpetuated somewhere else. You have to be very sophisticated because the enemy you're playing with is incredibly sophisticated. We need planet-friendly technologies. An obvious one is hydrogen. Hydrogen, when burned in an automobile or a boiler, combines with oxygen to produce water. It is a technology that is non-polluting. And by developing liquid natural gas storage and transportation technologies, we have proven that we can handle hydrogen. Hydrogen is highly explosive, but if you blow up a hydrogen loading or unloading depot, all you have is a very violent, localized explosion. You don't have planetary contamination of the water and the air. Hydrogen is the direction in which we should be moving. And the people who have studied it have put in place all kinds of technological schemes for bringing it to us. But the problem is that those who are already peddling natural gas and petroleum byproducts are not interested in this scheme. Their loyalty then is not to the species or to the planet, but the bottom line. In any civilized society, putting the bottom line ahead of civilization and planet would be a hanging offense, but not here. Another area, population control. This is one that everyone agrees with, but the facts of the matter have not, I think, been fully explored. A child born to a woman in San Francisco or Malibu will consume between 800 and 1,000 times the natural resources of a child born to a woman in Bangladesh. Where do we preach birth control? That's right, Bangladesh. The women who could make the notice that if every woman had one child, the population of this planet would fall by 50% in one generation. Now, without war, without famine, without displacement of populations, the population of the planet would fall by half in the lifetime of most people sitting here. I don't think people realize this. We tend to assume the population problem is unstoppable. The women most likely to hear the message that one woman, one child leads to a saner world are the highly educated women of the high-tech industrial democracies, the kind of women sitting in this room. Since their children are using 800 to 1,000 times more resources than the children of the third world, if 10 to 15% of the women in the high-tech industrial democracies were to follow this policy, the release of pressure on world resources would be visible within 10 to 15 years. Now, I realize these suggestions are highly controversial, and I have a number of them, so I don't want to. We could hold a whole conference on that concept. The other thing, another item, we need to deconstruct product fetishism. We need to, through the media, establish the idea that a Zen-like spareness is the highest expression of social consciousness when it comes to interior decorating, the building of country houses, and so forth and so on. Deconstruct product fetishism so that the Kikuyu or the Yanomamo become the paragons of behavior in terms of relating to material existence. We do not need to sell our souls to junk and then inherit a ruined planet. It makes no sense at all. This is a problem because the techniques of capitalism are to use advertising to spread discontent. They are selling you something you don't already have. Discontent is the obvious way to move you to make that purchase. So you're constantly being bombarded with images of your own inadequacy unless you have the correct running shoes, German automobile, or house in the country. Next item, demilitarization. There is much talk about getting rid of nuclear weapons because the leadership of these bankrupt fascist oligarchies could themselves be incinerated by nuclear weapons. But where is the lantern-jawed lad from Alabama on the subject of getting rid of all armies on this planet? Now is the moment because there are not large crystallized power blocks set against each other. How about a 15% reduction in all military budgets across the board? No one can claim that their security is lessened because their enemies too would reduce military spending. Apparently there's a big game going on dealing all this lethal junk all over the world, and that's why there's no mention of demilitarizing even such regimes as the Haitian or the Somalian regime. It is apparently a natural right of dominator jerks to have as much weaponry as they can buy with the money they steal and squeeze out of their captive population. Another area, democratic values and human rights. Democratic values and human rights. You cannot build an eco-consciousness out of a population of slaves ruled by oligarchs. And that is the situation for 1/3 of the human species, so long as the octogenarian trash that rules China is in place. Where is our government on that issue? And that leads me to government accountability. Are we making our governments accountable in the matter of preserving the environment, cleaning up toxic waste, disposing of the manufacturing processes of these oh-so-necessary weapons stockpiles that these characters feel they have to have? Well, that's a pretty nuts and bolts laundry list, not the sort of thing you're used to hearing from me. I think hearing a list like that, the sense is maybe great list, but it's a little overwhelming in the demands that it makes. How are we to fulfill these many agendas at once? And this is where we come to my bailiwick. It is less than 100 years since the great stabilizing and illuminating force in the lives of archaic people has come to the attention of Western civilization. The great stabilizing and illuminating force in the lives of archaic people is their vegetable connection to the Gaian mind, their ability to experientially, not abstract reasoning like I've been doing here, to experientially feel the planet, our mother, its needs, its tensions, where it is in pain. They do this through the ingestion of psychoactive plants. They did this through the ingestion of psychoactive plants for 50 to 100,000 years before the excrementally brained monotheist agriculturalist faction arose. The greatest gift of the vegetable mind to the human order is the psychedelic experience, because it allows the dissolution of boundaries, and it is going to be necessary to dissolve those boundaries in order to coordinate the metamorphosis of the human world. We have to have a vision. I don't mean a plan. I don't mean an agenda. I mean a vision. And the vision comes from above. It comes from, call it the unconscious, call it the Gaian mind, call it the Great Spirit. It doesn't come out of committee meetings and the data gathered by statistical analysis. We lack, at the highest level, not you and not me, but at the controlling level, we lack a vision. The best leaders among us are no more than crisis managers, attempting to manage us past an apocalypse that they are coming to believe is inevitable. That isn't good enough. That's not what my daddy raised me for, and it's not what your daddy raised you for. We represent the cutting edge of novelty in the biological world. Our self-reflective consciousness is our great glory. It also opens for us a dimension of moral responsibility unknown to the rest of the denizens of nature. Part of our Promethean and godlike aspiration to the control of nature is the concomitant obligation to care for nature and to feel nature. So really my message here is a message of psychedelic empowerment, of feeling. The ideas will come, the ratiocination will come, but what we have to do is feel our dilemma. If we could feel our dilemma and make other people feel our dilemma, we would move rapidly toward real solutions. We are anesthetized. We are a world dying under anesthesia for lack of authentic experience, authentic connection with the living world out of which we came. recently, just this past week, I read a wonderful book, which I recommend, called Going to the Heart by Kenny Green, or Good, I think, an anthropologist who lived with the Yanomami. The important thing about this book is he lived with them for 12 years, but he married a young girl of the tribe, and it tells the story of their life in the Amazon and their life in Rutherford, New Jersey. I mean, this woman had never seen an outboard motor. It was a wonderful book. I was skeptical when I began reading it. I just thought, why do I have to read about some guy who trophies a woman in the Amazon? I feel very badly for my judgment on it, because the message of that book is ultimately a message of love, a message of reaching across incredible barriers of culture and time and space to the essential humanness that unites all of us. And if we can do this by whatever techniques are available, if we can create a sense of community globally, then attending that sense of community will be a sense of caring and responsibility. It cannot happen unless we change our minds. We have the technologies, the money, the logistical ability to do almost anything in the human world, but we don't know how to change our minds. We are angels with a Siamese twin who is a monkey growing out of our chest. And this was all very fine when there were endless environments to despoil and vast herds of game. That curious amalgam of the animal and the angelic that is our humanness could exist in that kind of an environment, but no more. And for the past 1,000 years, the moral bankruptcy of Western civilization has become more and more apparent. The chickens are coming home to roost. We must build community, and we must do it in a short time. If we had 500 years to debate this and make our case, I don't think I would be advocating psychedelic intervention. But we're sick. We're terminal. We've lost our compass. We don't know who we are. We don't know where we want to go. Our own lives are an experience of inadequacy and tension. We have lost our compass, but it's there. And not because the psychedelics are a magical panacea. The psychedelics lift the veil on the intention of the Gaian mind, and we are but atoms in that Gaian mind. If we do not follow its purpose, we have no purpose. Who do we think we are? Western science is 600 years old. Human beings have been on this planet 2 million years. Life, 1.4 billion years. There is an enormous wisdom in biology, and we must become able to tap into that, articulate it, and then activate it. We are the crowning achievement of the evolutionary process. Let's not betray it. Let's make it the ascent to angelic being that is, I am sure, the intention of the Gaian mind and all the rest of the life with which we share this planet. Thank you very much.